perspective, talk to us about the moves that the US is making as we speak in terms of its carriers, in terms of its defenses.
The U.S. continues to move military assets in the direction of Iran. The most prominent of these is the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group with its onboard fighter jets and the missile ships that will be accompanying this. This is very heavy American firepower that, once it's positioned, will boost America's offensive and, I believe, also defensive capabilities, because there are also ships there that can take part in air defenses. And, of course, we know that from the Iran war, the Americans are also able to take part from Israeli soil. They're able to launch their own THAAD systems in support of Israeli air defenses, the Arrow systems, in the event of any Iranian counterattack that would target Israel, which I have to say is far from clear would even happen in the event of an American attack on Iran. It's far from clear that the Iranians would even be interested in dragging us into that. But of course, militaries have to plan for every contingency. And I think we're seeing that. I think we're seeing the Pentagon and the U.S. military and CENTCOM basically telling President Trump, look, if you act, before you act, you've got to have the pieces set up. We can't just send the B-2s immediately from the U.S. mainland, because the Iranians do still have probably around half of their missile arsenal from what they had before the June war. And, according to estimates, Israel was able to destroy, say, about 2/3 of their missile launchers, which is just as important as the missile itself. So they do have a bottleneck, but they've still got the ability to fire heavy volleys of missiles. And those can be directed at U.S. bases. Those can be directed at U.S. sites all over the Middle East, which is why, the neighbors of Iran became nervous and made it known publicly that they were trying to restrain the United States. When those messages came out, the target audience is, of course, the Islamic Republic of Iran, trying to tell Tehran, look, if you do get into a confrontation with the United States, know that we try to avoid it. You're seeing everybody cover themselves here. At the end of the day, in a few days, within about 5 days or so, the Carrier Strike Group will be in the region, will be positioned. The other ships and various other systems will be positioned. And then President Trump will have to make a decision. And I think, this is as much a political decision as it is a security or a strategic one. I'm sure that Yaki will have interesting insights about what goes through the mind of President Trump during a moment like this. But I think he's sort of caught, between two paradoxes. He doesn't want to go down as sort of another Obama, somebody who made a threat and then walked it back. But he also, I think, doesn't want to get caught in some sort of lengthy missile war with Iran after an intervention in Venezuela, after a previous intervention in Iran. He still, I think, got some pressure from the MAGA isolationists not to get into too many adventures. So how is he going to do this? And the Iranians, of course, are aware of these paradoxical considerations, and they're making it clear that they're going to respond. And what they're actually going to do after an attack is anybody's guess, because they are a wounded animal. It's very hard to predict what a wounded animal will do if it's attacked.
It's also
and here he speaks about the regime change. Now, you see envoys. The head of the Mossad is in Miami meeting Witkoff. Senator Lindsey Graham is coming here. The movement of the carriers. So all those signs means that, and what Yaakov mentioned, which is very important, he doesn't want to be perceived as Obama. And we already hear criticism not from the right, but also from the left. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, is saying, you said that you are coming in to help the protesters, and you're doing nothing. You have to keep your word. So he doesn't want to be perceived as Obama. And the final thing is, even J.D. Vance in Washington Post, it was published, that he said that he supports a strike on Iran. So it means that the opposition there is not so strong in the White House. So if you take all those signs, Trump is looking to do something. And if you look at what Trump wants to do, he wants to do something which is spectacular, something which is short and sweet, something that will not endanger American soldiers, and something that will be effective. So if you look at all those ingredients to this recipe, clearly he wasn't ready on Wednesday, which in Wednesday almost the strike went on. But it didn't eventually, because all those elements all those components were not there. But still, I think that Trump hasn't said his final word. Still, he wants to move forward. He speaks about the regime change. And it would be such a pity if we miss this opportunity, this exceptional opportunity to change the regime in Iran, because that would definitely not only affect the Iranian people, not only the Middle East, but the world as a whole, if we get rid of this awful, terrible regime.
Yaakov.
Yeah, two quick sort of questions that are going through my mind. I don't know if there are any answers, but one, is Trump still open to the idea of a new nuclear deal? Is he using this pressure, and is he saying to the Iranians behind the scenes, look, if you agree to a good nuclear deal, from my perspective, I'm willing to call the whole thing off? Is that door open? And even if it is, would the Iranian regime walk through it? Total unknowns, but I think worth bringing up.
That would be a missed opportunity, I think.
Right. And the second thing is, in terms of regime change, look, I think that the only way that this regime is going to come down is if a section of the elite, perhaps the Iranian army or somebody else that has power and weapons in Iran, turns them against the regime. We know that millions of people who are unarmed cannot bring this regime down, even after a very bruising, damaging war that it suffered when it basically lost the war to Israel. Millions of people came out into the streets months later. They can't bring down the regime because the regime will simply commit mass murder time and again. It's not enough airstrikes or unarmed people. There has to be an elite in the regime that turns against it for the regime to come down.
We can't talk about
the answer to who is going to disarm Hamas is always three letters to me. It's the IDF. There's simply nobody else that has the ability to do it or the intention of risking the lives of personnel or the motivation. There's nobody in the world, and it doesn't matter how many boards President Trump wants to form, how many international stabilization forces he wants to declare. When you look at the reality on the ground in the Gaza Strip, the contrast is so massive between these grand declarations and what's happening on the ground that it's almost, beggars belief. It's only the IDF that can disarm Hamas. Now, what I think Hamas is going to try and do is put on a show of disarmament. It's going to utilize its Qatari and Turkish allies, and it's going to try and use their soft power to try and sell Washington basically a phony show of disarmament. We've already seen this tried in Lebanon when Palestinian factions pretended to disarm by giving up some, AK-47s, and even Hezbollah played along with a sort of phony show of disarmament, very, very minor number of weapons that it allowed the Lebanese armed forces to take away. So these are all designed to basically take diplomatic pressure off them. And at the end of the day, I think it's critical for Israel to be able to have a clear line to Washington to make it clear that it's not going to tolerate this situation forever. It's not going to tolerate phony shows of disarmament. And this is why I think there is genuine upset about the presence of Qatar and Turkey on this executive board, because even if it has no practical value, it legitimizes their membership in the Islamist bloc. It legitimizes their pro-Hamas stance. And I think this is troublesome to many in Israel, especially those who want to ensure that Qatar never again has a role in the Gaza Strip like it did before this war. So all in all, looking at this from a military perspective, a security perspective, these are very fancy words that have almost nothing at all to do with what's happening on the ground. And, just to give you a quick example, what happened on the ground, the IDF eliminated a number of senior Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists after the terror organizations violated the ceasefire, crossed the yellow line, and attacked the IDF in recent days. And in retaliation, we saw pretty precise strikes. This is what's happening. Each side is building up, for the next confrontation. The IDF certainly has finalized its plans to take Gaza City, to take the central camps. Hamas is trying to rejuvenate its terror army. It's having great difficulties doing that because it can't smuggle weapons from Sinai. Israel sitting on the Egypt-Gaza border and preventing that smuggling, but it is trying to do dual-use items, turn them into weapons. So, both sides are preparing for the next clash at the end of the day. Obviously, Hamas wants to push that off and delay that. How Israel will respond to this ongoing diplomatic delaying tactics remains to be seen.
Yaakov Lapin, who is also the host of the Lapin Assessment on Patreon, is here with me in the studio. And there's kind of a mirror, isn't there, here between the UAE, who developed that huge, fantastic port of Berbera in Somaliland, and the Qataris are trying to do something similar, perhaps, in Libya.
There is certainly a parallel here. And also, let's remember that the UAE is supporting eastern Libya, the rival part of Libya, whereas the Qataris and the Turks are invested in and supporting each in their own way and in a sort of harmonious manner, because the Turks are involved with the military support. They've got bases in Western Libya. And Qatar is coming in with the infrastructure and the heavy investment. So you're seeing this pro-Islamist bloc working in synergy, supporting and what they hope will become their zone of influence in Western Libya. You've got in eastern Libya, General Haftar, and he has reportedly, been running low-key contacts with Israel for years. So you can see how this all breaks down in between these rival Middle Eastern blocs. And the way that Qatar and Turkey are working together to support Western Libya can give us a clue about what we can expect to see in Syria, because you can see Qatar acting as the wallet, Turkey acting as the muscle and as the military technology transfer, drones and what they call advisors and setting up bases. This is very similar to what's happening in Syria as well. So I think we have a model here for great power competition in the Middle East between the Islamists and the anti-Islamist blocs. UAE and Israel find themselves on the same side. Egypt, by the way, is also a backer of eastern Libya. And the pro-Islamist bloc, Qatar, Turkey, are finding themselves right on the other side of multiple zones in the Middle East.
And on the other side, pushing for progress, pushing for peace, pushing for stability, you've got the UAE and Israel. Saudi Arabia appears to have switched sides in the last few weeks.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is really becoming a big question mark. It used to be sort of the bulwark, the leader of the moderate Sunni bloc, the anti-Iranian bloc. Its cities were under fire from the Houthis with, Iranian weaponry and drones and missiles. And now, we're seeing the Saudis basically, I think, really hedging their bets to such an extreme degree, kind of taking a page out of the Qatari playbook to a certain degree. They haven't gone anywhere near as far as Qatar, but there's much more caution, much more hedging of the bets. And I think it's a signal of their absolute lack of faith about what might happen next in the Middle East, what the United States will do, whether it will be here or it won't. So the Saudis are saying, why should we take any risks and join any camp? Let's just try to play nice with everybody and thereby minimize risks to ourselves. That right now seems to be the Saudi game plan. And that's not so good for Israel, because Israel had gotten used to seeing Saudi Arabia as the leader of the moderate Sunni bloc. Now, it really is a question mark. I think that, ideologically, there is no major change in Saudi Arabia. What's happening here is more of a realpolitik hedging of the risks.
When you say the ideology hasn't changed, which ideology are you talking about?
The pragmatic, business-oriented.
Not the hardline Wahhabist ideology.
No, I don't think that, the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has turned into an Islamist. I don't think that that's what we're looking at all. I think that he is hedging basically the bet. And instead of betting only on the pro-Western moderate camp, he is trying to de-escalate with the Iranians, de-escalate with Qatar, de-escalate, with elements of the Islamist camp, while still being fully aware of the fact that they pose threats to the Saudi kingdom. And because of those threats, I think he's trying to use diplomacy rather than military to try and de-escalate those tensions.
Well, unfortunately for the Crown Prince, events seem to be getting ahead of him. If you look around the region, we can see, of course, what's happening in Iran. Saudi Arabia and Qatar were reportedly leading the charge to try and convince President Trump not to act in Iran. There is a suggestion that Saudi Arabia would prefer this weak, defenseless Iran, even if they are brutally repressing their own people. You've also got in Yemen, the movement in South Yemen. We keep seeing every weekend very big protests, people there who want to secede. They want their own part of South Yemen. Just going back to the Saudi long-term strategy, can they sustain that line of trying to please everyone at all times?
Well, look, they have resources, and they definitely have changed their modus operandi. I don't know if their strategy is sustainable. It's very hard to answer that from this vantage point, but I think you are seeing a much more, let's call it, Saudi-oriented and not a bloc-oriented approach to these things. So when it comes to, Yemen, we are seeing the Saudis openly strike Emirati-backed factions, telling them, you need to get in your lane. You have overstepped your mark. We don't want to see Yemen partitioned between, the various factions that are fighting against the Houthis. And at the same time, when you look at the Saudi approach to other countries, you're really seeing a change. You're really seeing Saudi basically turning down, rejecting this role of being the leader of the moderate Sunni bloc. And they are saying, we are no longer looking at this as a bloc. We're looking at this purely from Saudi interests. And those countries that want to cooperate with us will find a partner. Those that goes against our policies will find a very firm and harsh hand, even military, even allies. Now the Saudis and the UAE have seen, military blows traded in Yemen, which is something I think nobody thought would happen. So we definitely have to watch this space. I think, you know, as a final word about this, I'll just say that the Saudis really don't want the Iranians, you know, when you mentioned their position, they are simply fearful of Iran firing ballistic missiles at military bases on their territory. So when we're hearing their statements about Iran, I think we need to interpret that as the Saudis basically covering themselves and signaling to the Iranian regime, look, if something happens, we had nothing to do with it. Don't fire missiles at us. We try to de-escalate. This is them protecting, as far as they're concerned, their own security.
And just one more, if you will. I'm just talking about the kind of terrible twins of Qatar and Turkey. Of course, they have been named to President Trump's board of peace, kind of encircling Israel from all sides at this point.
They're trying to encircle Israel, absolutely, especially Turkey, which, you know, has really, you know, been pursuing its neo-Ottoman sphere of influence policy in Syria, in Gaza, and in other arenas. But look, militarily, they're not going to go into Gaza. Israel has vetoed that and made it very clear that this is a red line, and this would create a crisis in relations between the United States and Israel if the United States were to even flirt with the idea of allowing Turkish forces into Gaza. So that's a no-go. But even allowing them or inviting them on the board of peace is very troublesome to Israel because it gives Erdogan legitimacy. It gives the pro-Islamist bloc legitimacy. It plays into the soft power game, you could call it that, of influence that the Turks are now playing very aggressively. And Israel doesn't want to see that happen. It views Turkey as a problem. It doesn't officially view Turkey as an enemy, but it views it as a very, very harsh, almost one level below adversary, and we don't know where this relationship is going. You know, we could in the future see military tensions between Israel and Turkey. So absolutely, Israel is not pleased with this invitation at all.
All right, Jakob, thank you very much indeed. Sure. Jakob Lappin there.